You absolutely can record a great drum sound with one mic if you obey this big, pretty important rule of drumming. We'll talk about what this so important rule says, and we'll audition actually four different mics to possibly use for our one mic drum recording. Hey everybody, welcome to The Non-Glamorous Drummer. If you're new to the channel, I hope you'll subscribe. Today we're auditioning three different mics for our task at hand, so I'm gonna have all three of them positioned kind of out here according to where I think they each ought to be placed according to their strengths and weaknesses. We've got an SM57. I have these all over my drums here. You've seen them a bunch. They're kind of an industry standard, almost indestructible mic. They're just a really good solid mic. And we also have a ribbon mic that I currently use as my outside kick drum mic, but we'll also use one of the SM81s. I use these for overheads. These are a little more expensive. It's a $350 mic. And then we'll also be using audio recorded from my iPad, which functions as my overhead camera right here. And we'll decide which one is the best. We'll listen to all four of those and then we'll mix them down. In the part 2 video this Friday, we'll talk about different mix moves we can make to really pull out the strengths of the mics and really make sure we can hear the kit. So you saw in the thumbnail the big obey this law of drumming thing. And that's not meant to just be a clickbait kind of thing, like what's the big law of drumming? I gotta make sure I'm obeying it. Well, it's make sure that you're mixing yourself. It's really that simple. If you're gonna record drums with one mic, we can all guess what the big drawback is if you've only got one mic recording your drums. That's that if, in the end, once you listen to the recording, if you realize, oh, I can't hear the kick much, or I can't hear the snare, the hi-hats are overpowering, there's nothing you can do about that. But you can proactively beforehand mix yourself in real time as you record, because you know that, okay, the hi-hats are gonna end up too loud, this crash is gonna end up too loud, and so I'm gonna mix myself thinking ahead about how it's gonna sound through that mic, so that essentially I do still have the opportunity to mix, even though I won't be able to afterwards. And so that's exactly what we wanna do, and that's something that I know you guys have heard me talk a lot about on the channel. Usually we wanna play the kick drum loud and play the snare loud if we're playing a rock groove, hit the drums hard, tap the cymbals, hit the cymbals lightly. In the example, the playing example I'm using as we're auditioning the different mics, which we'll listen to in a minute, basically we have the same volume ratio between drums and cymbals all the time. That ratio stays the same if we're playing quietly versus if we're playing loudly. So just listen to this, you'll see what I mean. So that was an obvious loud example where we're hitting cymbals hard, we're hitting the hi-hats hard, but the kick is also really loud and the snare is also really loud, so that it still cuts through. But maybe a more practical example, if we're maybe playing more lightly or playing in a small room, would be something like this. Even playing through that, you could hear how the goal was to make sure the kick and the snare were consistent, even though they weren't super loud and I wasn't playing rim shots. They were at a good, consistent volume where they carried over past the cymbals. And I was making sure not to hit cymbals too hard. And so that's really the core thing here, talking about mixing yourself. We just want to make sure that the drums are always heard over the cymbals if we're playing rock. Now the exception might be if we're doing jazz, where it's a different ratio. In that kind of example, we want the cymbals to carry, and then the drums are the more quiet, kind of subtle thing that we then bring out for accents, but the cymbals carry the time. So we'll listen through each of these. We'll listen to each mic. I'll make it obvious which one we're hearing, including the iPad one. And let me know in the comments below which mic was your favorite, which one you like the most, because they're all very different. What we're gonna do in part 2 on Friday is actually talk about the mixing decisions we can make to listen to these and say, okay, how can we bring out the strengths? Like the ribbon mic, what is it doing well? How can we accentuate that? The condenser, what is it doing well? How can we accentuate that? How can we get rid of things that aren't so great, boost things that are great, and really get a good solid drum sound out of it? That's what we're gonna do Friday. So right now, let's listen to each of them without any processing, no reverb, no EQ, no compression, and just hear what they sound like raw in their various positions, kind of out here in front of the kit where they're capturing most of the drum set. So you could hear how none of these really sounded bad. They actually sounded pretty decent, and hopefully I did a decent job of practicing what I preached and mixing things okay as I played, so that really you're hearing everything and it sounds like a cohesive drum set sound, like you're just sitting there in the room listening. You really can make one mic work even if it's a phone or an iPad, and doing this is really a great practical exercise for helping you to be cognizant of how you're sounding, because as you're recording, especially when it's just one mic sitting out here, you're basically playing the way you ought to play if you're playing in a small room and you've got an audience right here and there's no sound guy helping mix you. You've got to mix you and you've got to make sure you sound good. So really, that's the challenge. That's the action step for this week. Try it yourself, even if all you've got is an iPad or iPhone or whatever. Doesn't matter. Record yourself with that. Even if the audio isn't perfect, you'll be able to go back and listen and you'll hear what you're doing too loudly or what's not being heard, if you need to bring the kick up. So I hope you enjoyed this today. Come back on Friday for our part 2, where we will mix these down in Logic, and we'll play around with especially the iPad recording. How can we make the iPad microphone recording actually sound really cool, and can we make it compete with the $350 condenser mic? That's gonna be pretty interesting, so I will see you guys on Friday for that.